Now let's go ahead and take a look at all the different shape tools. Shape tools will allow us to create actual shapes inside of Photoshop, and these are vectorized graphics, which means it's not using pixel information, it's using math to create these vectors, and you can scale them infinitely, and it becomes very important when you're doing design work, graphic design work, branding, logos, and things like that. So if you look down under the path selection tool, we see that we have the rectangle tool, and all of these use a shortcut letter U. So you have the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, the polygonal tool, line tool, and the custom shape tool. So we'll start with the rectangle tool, and we have some options at the top. So do we want to create this as a shape, a path, or do we want to turn it into pixels? We'll just leave it at shape for now. What color do we want to fill in that shape? So we'll just pick, like, say, a red, so that's easy to see, or maybe a yellow. And then the stroke, so this is the line that goes around it, so maybe we pick a red color. And then how thick do we want the stroke to be? Now we can turn off the stroke and we can turn off the fill. We can have just a fill and no stroke, or just a stroke and no fill, or both. This time we'll do both just so we can see them. How do we want the stroke line to look? So we have all these different options for our lines. Dotted, you can add in more lines, different types of strokes from Photoshop. How do we want to align them, and how do we want the ends to look? So the caps and the corners, do we want them to be hard or rounded? Then we can punch in manual information such as the width and the height. How do we want to intersect shapes? Do we want to align them? And how do we want to adjust them based on their layer visibility? Then we have some extra options such as the path options, and also do we want to align edges? So let's go ahead and just create a rectangle. If I click out here and I drag, you can see it creates that shape for us. It turns it into the yellow fill color and it strokes it for us. So if I click on the move tool, we can see that here. Now to edit any shapes, we can do it just like we would do with the pen tool. So we have the option to come in here and click the path selection tool and move this path around, or we can do the direct selection tool and click on these corners and actually manipulate them. It will say this operation will turn a live shape into a regular path. You want to continue, we can hit yes, and now we can adjust that as if it was a path, even though it's not a live shape anymore. So we can just go ahead and undo that. And the great thing about these is that you can edit them automatically, the settings at the top. So if I want to go ahead and change that fill color, I can click that and change those out immediately. Or say I don't want the stroke, I can click on the no stroke button here at the top, and it will get rid of that stroke for us. So now we just have that rectangle. Or let's say maybe I want to go ahead and stroke it a red color, but I don't want a fill color. I can do that also very easily. So if I take this and I drag it over, you will see that it has no fill in the center. It's not blocking anything. It just has that stroke. It creates a shape layer over in the layers panel. It calls it rectangle 1. We can always double click this later on and edit it. You can see all the properties for the shapes that we can also edit over here. So let's go ahead and delete that out. We'll take a quick look at all the other shapes. So we have the rounded rectangle tool. So this gives us the ability, if you look at the top now, we have a radius. It says 10 pixels. And as we click and drag, it'll give us a rounded corners. So this gives us an easy way to create things like buttons. Now, if we boost this number up, we can create a new shape, and you'll see it's even more rounder than it was before. So we'll delete those. After that, we have the ellipse tool. So we can go ahead and draw out an ellipse. These tools work just like the selection tools do. So with the rectangles and the ellipse, if I hold shift, it'll constrain the proportions. And if I hold alt, it will do it from the center versus the corner. So, and if I hold alt and shift, I can do a circle from the center instead of having it come out from the corner like this. So those options are going to work just the same way. Go ahead and delete those out. We have the polygonal tool. This tool works by just clicking one time into the document, and then it's going to ask you the width and the height, and then the number of sides, And do we want smooth corners? Do we want a star and indentation? So let's say we wanted 7 sides for this polygon. We hit OK, and it created a 7-sided polygon. Now we can scale this up. We can move the points around, and it's going to keep that information. You might not know the width and height immediately. Just punch something in, and then you can edit it later. We can go to the top and adjust the height and the width. So these weren't locked down, so when I moved the height, it scaled it downwards. But if I click on the link in the center and then I move the width and the height, they will actually scale together. Now, the great thing about vector graphics is that if we go in and we zoom in here, and I'm just going to move a little bit. Now, the border is a little crisp. Because it's still calculating on a pixeled screen. But basically what happens is we are creating vector graphics that are infinitely scalable. So we can make these as big or small as we want, and it's not going to lose any information. So if we were to blow this picture up, you would really start seeing these pixelated. But if we make this really, really huge, it's never really going to pixelate. You'll see the pixels in Photoshop because it's a pixel-based program and it's on a screen. But basically, if I were to blow the picture up as large as this shape is right now, we would have saw distortions a long time ago, but we don't see that because it is a vector shape. So that's a great thing about using shapes in the pen tool and the type tool, is that they are vector graphs. So let's go ahead and delete that. That's a polygonal tool. Then we have the line tool if you just want to create just simple lines going across, and then you have the ability to adjust those, the stroke and the fill and so forth. It's pretty basic. And then finally, we also have the custom shape tool, and this allows us to create all kinds of different shapes. So if we click and drag, we're creating this arrow, which is being read from the shapes up here at the top. If we click on this, you can see there's all kinds of different shapes, and just like most things in Photoshop, you can always add more later on. So we'll append in some animals, and now we have a dog shape. And so if I click over here, I can create a dog. And then because it's a shape, I can fill it, I can stroke it, and then I can adjust these points as need be. And you can always import more shapes directly into Photoshop. You can find all kinds of shapes online that you can import in here. So this gives you a lot of abilities with your design work to do all this stuff. Now let's take a look at how we can overlap and intersect shapes. So if I select the rectangle tool and then I click and drag out, it's going to create this rectangle for us. Now, just like other tools inside of Photoshop, if I hold Shift, I can add to this selection. Now, if I click Shift and I keep holding it down, it's actually going to create a square. So click to add in the shape, but then let go of Shift, and it's still going to add this in, but it won't create a square. It can be any shape that we want. So let's just overlap these two boxes here. And when I do, you can see that the red stroke border has actually changed and filled in these two shapes together. Now we can adjust the way that this happens at the top whenever you see this icon. So whenever we add in a new shape, do we want to create a new layer, which is if I didn't hold Shift and I just clicked, it would have created a new layer. Do we want to combine the shapes, which is what's happening now? Do we want to subtract the front shape? So now I can subtract the front shape from the previous shape. Do I want to intersect those shapes? So now we can see the intersection. Or do we want to exclude overlapping shapes? So you have that here. So this gives us a great way to create a different way of looking at shapes and how we can use shapes by combining them and working with them. So the shape tools, the pen tools, all of those tools that use the vector graphics and points and handles are very powerful in Photoshop because it gives us a lot that we can do by combining these tools and having the ability to edit their points and their paths and their shapes.